meeting. We had a council meeting earlier that ran over time, so I'll try and be as efficient as possible to get us as close back to time as we can. So just before, as we start off, do we have any apologies for today? Nope. Thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest? And again, no. So on that basis, we'll move straight into it. I would like to propose, you'll note that we have only one agenda item on the public excluded today, and that is confirmation of the previous meeting's minutes. So if nobody has any issue with that, I'd like to propose that we bring those minutes forward and make a new public agenda item 3.2. Councillor Blacklock.
I do have a matter of clarification around some of the minutes, but does that impact?
Yes, it does.
Yep.
Okay, so on that basis, we will leave it as it is and move into public excluded as and when time. So if we move now on to agenda item 3, please, which is confirmation of the previous minutes. And I would like to call on any errors, amendments or omissions.
Because this wasn't in review room, I think the arrangement has been or intended that we would deal with corrections there. It was possible because this set of minutes wasn't in that review room. On page 9 of our agenda, item 4.2, the third paragraph, the sentence reads, he expressed concern that the explanation for that in the report relating to projects and the council's commitment was not sufficient for why council was now in that position. I believe it would be clearer for posterity if it read council's commitment was not sufficient to make clear why council was now in that position. And in the 5th paragraph, second sentence, I think it should read, the second sentence, if at the end of November, council was 11 million more in debt than it had budgeted, the critical question would be. Personally, I would be happy to move adoption of the minutes with those amendments.
I'm comfortable with that. So that's moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Mayor Kircher. All those in favour? Against? Thank you, that's motion carried. I'd now like to just shuffle the agenda around a little bit because I'm conscious that Ms. Lyons has another meeting that she needs to get to around noon if possible. So I'd like to bring forward agenda item 5, 5.1 and 5.2 to now, please, and invite Ms. Lyons to speak.
Thank you. So on the risk update this quarter, you'll note that we have had some significant movement in the register. So we've actually got 5 risks rated as very high at a residual level, which is higher than we've had since this process began last year. So the 2 new very high risks are Three Waters transition and long-term plan. And I'm sure they don't come as huge surprises to anyone as we move towards quite a challenging period for both of those things. In addition to those 2 new very high risks, we continue to have climate change rated very high, credit risk failure by a borrowing entity and district development, and those last 2 were increased to very high last quarter and have remained in that position. I do think it's worth noting that this does signify quite an increase in our risk exposure, and as I said, this won't be a surprise, but we are moving towards quite a challenging LTP and uncertainty around the Three Waters change, so that will be featuring heavily in the risk register going forward, I imagine. We did add 3 new risks this quarter as well. So we added risk relating to data integrity, data protection and privacy, and adherence to legislation. So 2 of those risks have a rating of high, so that was data protection and privacy and data integrity, and the risk relating to adherence to legislation and regulation has a rating of medium, and all those details can be found in attachment 3. So that includes the new and changed key risks.
Thank you. I have a few questions and comments, but before I go into those, I'd just like to ask the floor, are there any questions? Councillor Blackler.
Thank you. And thanks for the update. I just wanted to clarify that the risk item 3 Waters transition is trying to capture the overall impact that could have around our ability to meet the own performance targets we set for ourselves. Around debt levels, cost against marriage superannuation rates. Would that kind of be encapsulated under that risk description? Or if not, should we be adding a separate?
Yes, so that risk does aim to include the impact on the community. So in the increase in potential rates, the increase in debt levels that we may retain, as well as the impact on staff through that transition. So it's trying to pretty much capture everything related to 3 Waters in that one risk.
It's a big unwieldy risk which is difficult to manage. Councillor Hopkins.
That's another one. Amelia, you're our risk expert. You've seen fit to elevate long-term plan risks from medium to very high. Your report says to us that the risk we face is that the long-term plan is ineffective or not fit for purpose due to conflicting and uncertain requirements and directives from central government, resulting in wasted time and resources and inability to set rates, and the need to complete a long-term plan amendment. So in your expert opinion, is the risk of not producing a long-term plan greater than the risk of actually producing one? And might it be, if we were sensibly risk averse, that we wouldn't bother doing a long-term plan, given all of the risks you identify with us doing so?
So just to clarify, the increase to very high was a decision made by the ELT group. So I don't rate the risks alone. Their expert opinions, of course, formed that decision to increase that risk. But I think what we have considered in that process is how we adhere to legislation. There are currently 2 pieces of legislation that don't quite line up with each other in terms of what we've got to include in a long-term plan, and how we create a long-term plan that is effective and means something to our community and gives them a full picture. But at the same time, that may lead us down the path of needing to do an amendment when there's a decision made around 3 Waters. But perhaps Mr. Hope can also add some clarity.
I mean, yeah, the heart of your question, councillor, was about, essentially, is it less risky not to undergo the process? And I think, as probably the chief executive and other members of the exec team have articulated, it's more about, probably the legal process in terms of a long-term plan. We still should be doing longer term planning for the sake of council and the community, whether it fits into a formal document or not. And there's hazards around that. That is more what we're talking about, not needing to have a good understanding of what the futures may look like, because that's the thing, that there are several alternate futures that we're having to consider. And of course, the biggest risk is, if you don't go through this process, you've probably got no legal basis to set a rate. And that's quite a hazard for the organisation. So we need to either have a long-term plan or an annual plan in place to set a rate. So that's the very significant risk. Okay. And it's not a risk, it's a
so that is the heart of the extreme impact of this risk. So I get the almost certain that we're going to produce a LTP that's not, compliant in the sense of or contradictory, but I'm trying to understand what it is that makes the impact of this risk extreme, because you could write a 2-page document that covered you off legally.
No, you couldn't.
Okay.
I mean, there is so why it is extreme is because at the moment we have an act in place that sets out one set of conditions that you should prepare a long-term plan under, and a government that has said it is going to revoke those acts, yet has not said what it will replace it with. So it is that extreme level of uncertainty that is really creating the risk of council producing a long-term plan that does not comply with parts of the current legislation, and in the trying to achieve a long-term plan that is semi-fit for purpose. I don't think we'll get one that's fully fit for purpose, but is still compliant enough to allow us to set rates. It is going to be a challenge, but we do have a fundamental issue lying at the bottom of it. We need to get something in place.
Yeah, but how do we ensure that what we get in place is the minimum viable product in the environment that we're working in?
Sorry, essentially, I think Paul and Amelia are saying to us, this year's annual plan is, we could sum it up in one sentence: we don't know where we're going, and here's how we're going to get there.
No, we don't know where we're going in one key component.
Okay.
So we're going to, we're going to bring alternatives to council to allow it to, produce that minimum viable product.
Okay.
But a minimum viable product should still allow us to engage with the community and set out with as much clarity as we can the issues we are facing. I mean, it really is probably around the consultation document, because you're going to have, the government has at the moment made a commitment to provide clarity in February, which impacts the consultation document. There should be far more clarity at the time we need to adopt an annual plan in June to set the rates. So it's just, we're in this is a snapshot to tell you the situation at the moment. And say, because it has become so unclear, the risk has increased, and that's why it is a absolute focus of the exec team of officers, and I'm sure of yourselves, to come up to be as productive as possible, so that we can produce something that is as compliant as possible, as fit for purpose, and still allows us to really discharge as many of our statutory responsibilities as we can.
Okay, so there is a treatment plan in place. The treatment plan is dependent on the timing of some clarification, but in the interim, everybody's focused on what we need, focused on the risk and the need to resolve the risk. I'm conscious that Deputy Mayor Halale has a question.
Yeah, thank you, through the chair. I guess just for me, the risk description doesn't necessarily match the mitigation. The mitigation appears to be based around the communication and engagement with the community, whereas the risk description, you're actually talking about a level of compliance, performance, and productivity. So those are just some things that I'm highlighting here, just to be really clear and concise. Just to, it just reads hard. It's hard to read, and then when you match it with the controls, it's inconsistent. It's just what I'm reading from it. That's all.
Yeah, we'll look at that next quarter.
Okay, thank you. Look, I just had one other comment that I'd like to add here, and it might seem minor, but when we're talking about risks that are out of appetite, it's really important that we consider those and deal with them. And we've just discussed one that's out of appetite, the long-term plan, but there's another one sitting on here that says that we've approved it being out of appetite in the past, and this is relating to the vision system that the property team uses. So we have an out-of-date piece of software that we use to bill around $2 million worth of rental revenue per annum, and it talks about a replacement system being implemented, but my understanding is that that's not being implemented whatsoever. We're still thinking about it, and I just would like to make the point here that this is an out of appetite risk. There are a whole lot of third-party providers out there that could run this service for us tomorrow. I don't understand why we're still sitting here on a $2 million a year revenue risk when it's just about going out to a property rental management company at its simplest form.
So that one, I believe will be covered, well, hopefully will be covered in the long-term plan. There will be a line item for that. And yes, it was put through as an acceptance because we're aware that we're not actively replacing that system right now. So otherwise we would have put that into the being treated bucket and it wouldn't have been reported up to this committee.
Okay, so a supplementary question for somebody. Why does a rental billing system have to go into a long-term plan? Okay, we might.
Well,
look.
Goes into a long-term plan because it's going to be a reasonably significant cost to establish the system. So the process would have been to run any of these major items through a governance team approval process before it's undertaken.
I challenge whether it needs to be a costly, expensive process, and I may not understand it properly, but I'd like to go away and do that more. Right, Councillor Blackler.
Thank you. And sorry to go back to the long-term plan, but and under the risk description, I just note there's no mention of affordability in that, and I think that should be one of the key words.
Oh, was that for the long-term plan key risk? Yeah, right, yeah, I'll note that, thank you.
But
Sorry, Councillor Hopkins.
I would have thought that the ELT we might choose to identify that as a separate risk, because what Councillor Blackler is talking about is not the fact that the plan will be ineffectual or inadequate. What he's talking about is community reaction to levies and charges that they deem to be unaffordable. So the very high risk, I think, is a very negative community reaction to what is perceived to be an excessive rate rise. But that's a separate risk, I think. So I mean, it could and should be there, but I mean, it's not part of the LTP per se.
Sure. So we can go away and look at whether that risk is covered under anything else that could be expanded on, or whether it needs to be a separate risk set up to cover it off. Okay. Any other questions on the risk component, noting the discussion that we've had? Sure.
Can we get some resolution on your one? I mean, you've raised a very valid point. What's the suggestion?
I don't think we can resolve in the session today a procurement plan for a replacement system to Vision, but I want to make sure that that is something that we do look at and see whether it can be, whether it's not necessary.
We could move that the park committee request officers to investigate outsourcing lease management system as a means of saving money and improving the service.
If you're happy to move that, do we have a seconder?
I just did move it without realising I had. All right, the park committee request officers to report on the viability of outsourcing to the lease management Vision system with a view to reducing costs and improving service.
And that's seconded by Councillor McKine. All those in favour?
Right.
Against? It's carried. Thank you. If there are no further questions around the risk, oh, sorry, Councillor Percival.
Right. Yeah, not being a member of this committee and nor being privy to previous conversations, I wonder about the climate change risk and how it remains stable after being as rated very high. Climate change, well, risks are controllable. and because I have missed out in previous conversations, obviously, why is climate change rated so high?
Okay, so I'm gonna address that here and now. Your comment there about risks being controllable is fundamentally flawed in this basis. A risk is something we identify, and then we talk about whether there are treatment plans for it or not. So I appreciate that to a large degree the climate change risk is uncontrollable. It still is a significant risk for both our community and our infrastructure. So this committee is not about identifying risks that we can just control. It is about identifying all risks and understanding where and how we can control them. I'll also note that the Office of the Auditor General took a very dim view to councils that didn't recognise the importance of climate change risk in their risk register.
Well, that's clarified things for me. Thank you, Simon. But I still believe what you say is the two ways you put it are still the same thing.
We are all entitled to our beliefs, Councillor Percival, but I stand by the fact that the risk committee is not about identifying and reporting on only risks that are controllable by us.
Mr. Chair, I move the recommendation.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Deputy Mayor Halale. All those in favour? Against? This motion carried. Thank you. Ms Lyons, conscious of the remaining time that you have, but if we move now on to 5.2, the procurement update.
Thank you. So this quarter, we've compiled the procurement report with a little bit more information. So last quarter, I know there was a request for further information, and hopefully this goes away to satisfying that. There are ongoing discussions with finance as to how we can refine this more and improve it, but a few ways that have been bandied around would be quite resource heavy in terms of producing linked reporting. So we will continue to see where we can make improvements, and those will be within reasonable expectations of time being used. So this quarter we had 27 contracts awarded over $10,000. 20 of those were via a standard procurement process and 7 were via non-standard processes. In the attachments, you'll see the breakdown between physical works contracts and professional services contracts. There was quite a large contract in the professional services this quarter, which was around the bridge renewal for Kakanui River, which makes up the majority of that total amount. Procurement policy adherence checks are ongoing, so we've checked those, and what we've seen is that the more recent procurements adhere much better to the policy than the older procurements, which is positive. And the policy is due for renewal in March, so that will be reviewed in the first quarter of next year.
Thank you. If my question relates to the policy adherence reviews and where we get to see, where we get vision of what those variances are. So for me, this is great. It's part of the way there, but I want to know what the components were behind those two non-standard roading procurement contracts. And when you talk about adherence is closer to than what it was before, I want to know why and where. So where is that reporting being surfaced?
So that's to be sent to tier 3 managers, so they'll be able to see in their particular area the reviews that were undertaken and the outcomes of those. And the only issues that were found were around business case completion, where there'd been some confusion around whether the long-term plan definition was enough to constitute a business case, but those were going back quite a way, so I think there's more clarity around that now. And just linked to that, I think the last time the policy came, I think it was Councillor Blackler who did question whether it was appropriate to have business cases included in the procurement policy, but it's kind of there because we didn't have a project management methodology built yet that encompass business cases, and that is set to be it's in development now and set to be released next year. So that will help that process.
Okay, thank you. So even if there was just an additional paragraph under the policy adherence reviews in here that sort of talked about, you know, this is why it wasn't, and these are the improvements that we've made, would be really useful just in terms of us being able to understand this a little bit better. Are there any questions, Councillor Mackay?
I have several, but we'll start. So could you tell me what the difference between standard and non-standard is to start with? What do we do?
So standard under $200,000 would be to get 3 quotes, and over $200,000 is a market tender. So where anyone wants to directly engage a contractor for whatever reason, it might be that they're currently doing some work and it makes sense to directly engage them to continue on with additional work in the same area or on the same street, then that would be a non-standard procurement. If it was over $200,000 and we said, actually, we'll get a better response by going out and asking for 3 quotes rather than a tender, that would be non-standard. But that just needs some additional, sorry, I've lost the word then, additional approval. So that would go to, for over $200,000, 2 group managers are required to sign that off.
So I think there are multiple reasons why it's standard or non-standard, and that's, I guess, to the heart of my point about why I wanted to understand why they were non-standard and get the kind of classifications behind those. So one tender because there were no others, or this or that, or it would just be good to see that transparency surfacing.
Yeah, look, I totally agree. And the other comment I'll make, and I know you highlighted in professional services that the Kakanui Bridge took up quite a substantial number, but yeah, that number I find it's almost double of what the professional services, the physical works were, and I have a problem with that, as most people know in this room, about consultants and everything else, and we have a lot of staff, but I don't think we can afford both. So either the staff stand up and do the job they're employed to do, or the consultants do the job that we can't afford both, in my opinion.
So just on that, I absolutely understand your point and know that you've shared it before. I don't think that is something that procurement are responsible for doing, but we should note the importance of it and your concern with it. Councillor Hopkins.
Look, I have one question about the bridge renewal and some for either Mr. Hope or Mr. Cook about planning. Can we give more information about this bridge? I mean, I'm trying, when I saw it, and I saw the figure $1,007,680 on bridge renewal for the Kakanui River, I was thinking, have we built a new bridge there? So I want more information about what exactly that $1 million plus bought us. And Mr. Cook or Mr. Hope, I noticed that Foresight Consulting was paid $30,000 to process consents, and Barker and Associates were paid $20,000 to process consents. And I also noticed a $23,000 legal bill for Anderson Lloyd Lawyers for District Plan Review Project Management. Now, they're big costs. Why were they incurred? And yeah.
Okay, so the bridge discussion is probably a bigger one than today, but we can request more. Or do you have something you want to say to it now, Mr. Hope?
I'll need to go and check, but I'm pretty sure that there was actually a report that came through council to approve the awarding of the bridge design contract because of its significance. But this is a very significant project that requires some pretty specialist advice in engineering, so that's why it came through council. So
no, you're quite right. It's just bridge renewal. That didn't tell me that that's what it was. Hence my question. But you answered it perfectly.
You're comfortable with that question? The second question around consultants' fees, Mr. Cook.
Thank you, through the chair. Foresight Consulting have been processing consents. I believe elected members will be aware that we have carried some planning vacancies. We also use external consultants to process internal consents due to perceived conflict of interest. And those consents, one of which was actually my consent, is fully cost recovered based on the fee that they charge. In terms of Anderson Lloyd have been providing continued legal advice to the district plan process. There's a number of legal matters that need to be make sure that we're aligned with the RMA, and they are experts in that field.
Thank you. And I think that comment about some of these costs being recoverable are really useful. I'm conscious that Ms. Lyons needs to go soon, but Councillor Percival, you have a question?
Thank you. $102,500 was spent on Oamaru water capacity and upgrades between 3 contractors. Why would we have 3 contractors doing the one described activity?
I'm assuming that would be their different technical specialities. So it depends what consultant was required to feed in to those capacity study and upgrade pieces. I can go back and ask the question if you would like more detail.
Yeah, I'm sorry to put you on the spot. I wouldn't know. But yeah, I would like an explanation for that. And I'd also like to know the 240,000 spent on repairs on the A2O. Is that recoverable from MB?
Okay. Both of those questions, Ms. Lyons, can come back to you on. So taking those questions and the responses into account, can I ask if there's anybody who's happy to move the acceptance of this procurement report? Councillor Blackler, seconded. Deputy Mayor Halale, all those in favour? Aye. Against? That motion's carried. Thank you very much, Ms. Lyons. Apologies for holding you up an extra 7 minutes. Okay, and so I'd now like to ask if we could please move back to agenda item 4, which is the agenda item 4, which is the Treasury update. I note we don't have Ms. Nichols available, but
she was online, but she's not.
Okay, then in the interest of time, Mr. Hope, are you comfortable speaking to this?
Sure am. So this is, setting out the, we need to have a basically strategy in place for each quarter under the Treasury policy. This is a piece of work that is still evolving, and we want to add far greater clarity into future strategies and also improving sort of the disclosure through the borrowing management investment policy as part of the long-term plan. There is a reasonably significant amount of detail in there, but more of it is about where we are at the moment. Why this was a bit late, and it still probably doesn't meet the information requested by the committee at the last meeting in terms of the future borrowing requirements as set out in what I'm seeing is, I think, page 7 of the addendum. It was, there was a request to be clear, to give a better indication about the likely debt position at the end of the year. There is a number in there. It highlights the matters that were considered when coming up with that estimate. We would like that to be more refined and a better process to identify that going forward. But that is the best estimate at the moment based on the information at hand. But as we sort of did work, it really did become clear that it can be a reasonably changeable amount, right? Including matters like council will be considering a reasonably significant item at the next council meeting in terms of the sports and events centre. Once that decision is made, then we'd start working on what cash flows might look like and the likely impact of those in sort of the first 6 months of the year. So, again, it's it is a moving feast, and we need we are working on a way to better monitor and report that, but that is the best estimate based on the information we have at hand at the moment. So really that is what the borrowing will in the next quarter will be focused on, to make sure that we can meet our obligations that council has committed to. So I'm quite happy to answer any questions or provide any further clarification.
Thank you. Unsurprisingly, I have several, but I'll open it to the floor first, perhaps. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, I have three questions. Would you allow me to ask them all now, or do you want to one at a time?
Let's go one at a time.
Right. Well, the first question is a relatively minor matter on page 5. There's a reference at the very top of that page to Corridor Water Limited having been lent $17.5 thousand or $17,500 interest fee providing initial setup. This advance will be repaid as part of the final settlement when council's water assets are relinquished. Well, since they're not going to be, how's it going to be repaid?
Yeah, so it'll be just a matter that we work through with Corridor Water in terms of making the rate sure that the rates are set at an appropriate level for the coming years.
Jeff's here.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Second question on the same page. Down at the bottom, you're talking about the bank call accounts and so on. Council currently holds 3-term deposits. Well, you tell us what the interest rates are: 2.75% for a call account and 4.5% for 12 months. We apparently have 3-term deposits, each for $1 million, one maturing in 8 days' time, one on the 20th of January and one on the 20th of February next year. Why have we got nothing at the higher interest rate of 4.5% for 12 months?
I mean, those amounts were drawn down really because of the moving into the Christmas break and the potential difficulty of raising funds over that period, because we're going to have less staff availability, and the LGFA does also close down for a bit. So essentially, we're only looking at drawing those to cover a quarter. If we were investing for 12 months, we would almost need to borrow for the same 12-month period to provide the investment fund. So that's why it's pretty much on a short-term focus.
So just on that, I have some questions around that. In October and November, we borrowed an additional sum of $15 million.
Yeah.
No, $15 million, 10 and 5.
Right.
We borrowed $15 million additional dollars in October and November at an interest rate of circa 6% or thereabout. We've got more than $10 million sitting in a bank account at the moment that's earning us less than 3%. Why did we draw that money down to lose at least 3% on for a couple of months? Because by my simple math, $15 million at around about a 6% interest rate cost us just over $2,500 a day. That's every day of the week, every week of the year, over $2,500 a day in interest rate costs alone.
Yeah, I'd need to come back and look back at the decision-making process about how we came up with the borrowing amount. So yeah, I would need to go back to that. So sorry, I can't provide.
Okay,
I can't provide an adequate answer at the moment.
Sorry, Amanda, you're on.
We needed that money to make payments for significant water projects during that period. 20th of October payment run was over 7 million, and so we had to draw it down at that time. And then 20th of November to make these significant capital contractual payments. It's just a timing thing, because then we had our rates due by the 25th of November. So to tie us over until the 25th of November rates take, we needed that money. We also dipped into the CAL facility. We had no available cash. We were using that 14 mil.
But we've borrowed that $15 million for a period longer than that shortfall. So we now have $11 million sitting in a call account.
Yeah, so the call account's earning 4.5. We have significant, we're going to be paying 7 mil on the 20th as well, 20th of December. It's quite hard to judge. There's a lot of contractual obligations coming in these few months.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate that it is hard to judge and difficult. I guess the point that I'm making here is that once we start to, we've gone from borrowings of circa $40 million that was to a large degree offset by loans to other entities to now having $61 million worth of borrowings that's forecast to go out to $80 million worth of borrowings by June of next year. And the example that I gave before just highlights the significant interest rate costs that we carry every day for excess money that we don't need. So I'm really keen to see how we can work to establish a great cash flow model, Amanda. And I know that that's something that you've been great at in the past, and it's something that we should look to try and do more and more here to try and reduce those costs as much as we can.
Yep, definitely happy to do that.
Thank you. I'm sure there's other questions, Councillor Blackland.
Right, one more later on.
Thank you. Yeah, I just endorse the conversation there around cash flow reporting going forward, and I understand that it's happening in the background at the moment. So I just wondered on page 7 of the report, under future borrowing requirements, we talk about the lift from the projected 50 mil to 80 mil. It would be good to have a breakdown of how that's comprised. So X amounts attributable to inflationary pressures, X amount to the timing factors that we spoke about at the last PAR meeting, and X amount out of budget factor. I'm not sure if anyone can touch generally on those. And also, just for a matter of clarification, a couple of points through this report, there's mention of funds being used to plug an operational shortfall, and we've discussed this in the past and clarified that we don't use LGFA funding to fund operational expense. But I think the report is a little bit misleading in the wording, and I understand that it's more about timing of capital works program and such like, but I just think the wording could perhaps be a little bit clearer in that respect.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, so you would need to be clear about operational cash flows versus sort of business as usual operations and how those are funded, because they are certainly fully funded from rates revenue and user charges as we set out in the annual plan. In terms of why I think the estimated position in terms of debt at the end of this year there's going to be quite a difference to where we're going to end up. Certainly Amanda and the team are still working through that, but I think at the moment we have found I suppose a minor flaw in the financial model that we used to produce the annual plan, in that it wasn't picking up, if a reserve essentially went into overdraft, it wasn't picking up that overdraft piece as needing to be sort of added to the debt. It was primarily focused where we said we're going to fund a project from a loan to picking up that's what the increases debt is going to be, and sort of missing the nuance of, if a reserve went into overdraft, then we would need to borrow to fund that. So that, plus the accelerated spending that we talked about. So that's it's a sort of a combination of things. It's like, yeah, we've brought a bunch of things forward, which is the main reason for it. We're also missing that, yeah, as we've talked about in other meetings, yeah, that need to essentially fund an overdrawn reserve does need a cash flow, does need cash to do that. And that wasn't being factored into the borrowing calculation or the borrowing model that we were using to establish annual plan. So we've now addressed that, so it will be fully reflected in the long-term plan model, where it's obviously going to have a potentially far more significant effect. So that's a refinement we had developed.
Thank you. And I think the other thing that we will appreciate as well, and Amanda referred to it before, is that this is a really lumpy revenue business where you get paid every quarter and there's lots of costs in between. And I think, again, that just highlights the importance of us really honing in on that cash flow management model, just because of that nature. Councillor Hopkins.
So last question. I think the answer has been implicitly provided already, but I have been asked by a ratepayer. So, and I will clarify, just to be absolutely explicit, the forecast June 2024 external borrowing balance is predicted to be close to 80 million. Does that include the $8 or $10 million currently earmarked for the Sports and Events Centre?
No, it doesn't. Because we're not expecting to expend $15 million on the event centre in 6 months.
Then just what Simon said a wee while ago, he'd done some sums. We borrowed 15 million, and that was 2,500 a day. So I got me old calculator out on the phone, and I basically, if we've got $80 million, right, then multiplying 15 by about 5, which takes you up to 80, and multiplying 2,500 a day by 365 by 5, I end up with a debt servicing cost for next year of $4,562,500. Now, it won't be that, but you guys should by now know what our debt servicing costs are going to be next year over the 12 months. What are they going to be in total?
Well, Councillor, no, we don't know what it is going to be next year, because we don't know what with certainty what the undertakings for next year will be, and a significant movement in that debt servicing cost will be the additional drawdowns over that period. If I suppose the alternate question is, well, what is the baseline debt servicing cost based on $80 million? Then certainly we can calculate that, because it's a straight function of really all the information that's been disclosed. So that is the no, not now, because I'd need to go through and we've got, as it's outlined in the report, about 20 different pieces of debt with different interest rates attached to them, some of which will mature during that period and need to be refinanced. So it's not a 80 times 5,
which is why your $4 million phone calculator cost will be wrong, because it'll be a weighted average cost, and we can say with confidence what the servicing costs of the $61 million of debt that we've got now is, and we can forecast what the additional debt costs could be, but we can't lock them in for certainty unless we lock in that fixed rate mortgage right now. Mayor Kircher.
Yeah, I just wanted to make the comment that, I think it's a fair question, but it's also fair to actually ask it before the meeting, so that officers are prepared with the answer, because they aren't often going to be able to pull out the exact number if they do have it.
It only came to me because of Simon's chucking in the 2,500.
Well, I think making a statement that officers should know what it is and should be able to tell us right now, I think that was perhaps a bit misleading as far as rather than just politely asking.
Fair point.
Yeah, I think it's it's something where they understanding they might not be able to answer it then, but they can answer it following the meeting when they get the information.
Yes.
And I think in a positive framing, it again leads nicely into that desire by Mr. Hope and the team to have much greater understanding cash flows and much greater transparency around them. And, you know, obviously the more debt the council incurs, the more important it is that we hone in on that. So thank you. And thank you, Mayor Kircher, for that comment. Are there any other questions that we've got with regard to this? Councillor Blackler.
Thank you. With respect to the treasury strategy overall, do we think under option 1 A through C that gives enough emphasis to reviewing the performance indicators and thresholds set with key consideration given to the holistic impact of the council and wherever water sits eventually as from a holistic point of view, or do we think that actually needs to be spelt out?
It's only for the third quarter.
I think, you know, we're probably talking about two different things. This is really just a relatively, it's a strategy for a quarter. So it's not really a strategy. It's more a plan. Yeah. Whereas the borrowing management and investment policy and the financial strategy that need to be included in the long-term plan, like that is the place where really the items you've raised need to be considered and talked about as a whole, rather than, you know, and that's certainly something that Amanda has been working on, will be presented. You'll sort of have a draft and the reading pack for the period, and then we'll have a pretty robust discussion about it in the new year in terms of, you know, what are the limits you're comfortable with, what are you trying to achieve, and how does that need to be reported to this committee and to council in terms of compliance with really the parameters you've set and how that is contributing to the outcomes you're trying to achieve. Yeah, as I think we've said in the past, even though it was only written 3 years ago, the prior Treasury strategy is really no longer fit for purpose, just because of the environment we've gone through and the issues we face.
Yeah, and I think, Mr. Hope, that's really, really good background and does highlight the importance of a workshop early in the new year to address exactly that point that you're raising. Councillor Hopkins, I would love for you to move it. Do we have a second? Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Councillor McCone had another question.
Councillor McCone.
So look, yeah, I know but it's part of it. So worst case scenario, I'm hoping is this 80 mil at the end of the 30th of June 2024. But do we have a plan? And bearing in mind that it's borrowed money, we've got to pay it back. We do have investments, but in my mind, they don't count until they're paid back. So it means it's cash flow that we're struggling with from what I'm reading through here. Rust never sleeps, and neither does interest. So we've got to be aware of that continuing cost. So according to my rough figures, which are worse than Jim's, it's about 6.9 to 7.2 million, which and that's at 7% interest and 2% principal payback. But do we have a number? Because we're in the hole for that much. How do we get that back?
I think that is exactly the question that was asked just before. Do we have a number in terms of what our total costs are? So, for example, principal repayments with LGF money, you don't have principal repayments throughout. It's not going to be 7% because it's a weighted book.
I understand that.
So I stress, I think, and I apologise for coming up with a number before as a rough estimate, but I don't see much value in us all getting the calculators out and having a crack at this, right? We know it's a big number and we know that it's a complicated number to calculate.
I think it's almost the response to your question is almost the same one again to Councillor Blackler. It's all about what's in the Treasury, the borrowing management investment policy that you adopt, and the guidelines that are part of the long-term plan, because that sets out how will this debt be serviced, who will be paying it, and over what term should it be repaid. So and then we've got the mix of that's for the council as a whole versus the cash flow issue. And I think we need greater clarity, as we've said, about the impact of the cash flow issue on council and capturing that appropriately, because they're related but not synonymous.
And so the Treasury strategy or the Treasury policy is the rule book that these guys have to use when they're borrowing debt. You are the approvers of that policy. We will be having a workshop early in the new year where we surface that again, and you will have the opportunity to review and approve or not approve that rule book.
Mr. Chair, for the second time, I agree.
Thank you. Seconder, Deputy Mayor Halale, all those in favour?
Aye.
Against? That's motion carried. Thank you. I'd now like to propose that we move into public excluded. Do I have somebody to move that, please? Councillor Blackler, carried. Seconded. Deputy Mayor Halale. Thank you all. So we will now move into public excluded. I'll just give the opportunity to go offline. Oh, sorry, my apologies. And for those of you who could stay on that a little bit later, thank you very much. This is the last part of the year, but no doubt we're all looking forward to more installments next year. Thank you.